Coming up in this week's Torah Pearls.
What is meant by the phrase, "My father was a wandering Aramean"?
What is the hidden pattern in the Moses scroll that appears in the Ebal and Gerizim ceremony, and how does it differ from that which is in Deuteronomy?
Did Moses claim to be God?
Speaking of Ebal and Gerizim, why are the tribes divided this way between the two mountains?
All right, Jono, let's jump in.
This is a good one. G'day, dear viewers, and thank you for your company once again here on truth2u.org. That's truth number 2, letter U.org. I am Jono Vandor, and joining me from the Horeb Institute in Louisiana is, of course, Ross K. Nichols, the author of the Moses Scroll. G'day, mate.
Hello, Jono. How are you, my friend?
I'm pretty chuffed, I have to say, because we are finally returning to the Moses Scroll in our Torah portion, Ross. So
yes,
that's a bit exciting. We have a lot to say about that. There's a little bit more Josianic reform before we get there. But this right now, we're in Ki Tavo. That's our Torah portion for this week, and it kicks off.
By the way, let me say, if people are following in the Torah tablet, that's on page 154. I just wanted to give that page number. I have some friends who use this, and they say, don't forget to tell us what page we're on. So,
yeah, okay, there you go.
There it is.
That's where we are. And we do, of course, have Ezra, our AI critical scholar, to help us along the way. So, Ezra, give us an academic overview of Ki Tavo.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Torah Pearls. We're diving into Ki Tavo this week, a portion packed with covenantal intensity and literary weight. Academically, Ki Tavo is notable for its structure and Deuteronomistic theology. It opens with a ritual declaration of the first fruits, a reflection of Israel's agrarian identity and their theological memory tied to the Exodus. This is followed by a detailed covenant renewal ceremony to be enacted at Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, classic hallmarks of the Deuteronomistic history emphasizing blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. The crescendo is the curses section, a sweeping litany of covenantal consequences that reflects ancient Near Eastern treaty patterns, especially from Hittite vassal treaties. These curses aren't just poetic, they're performative, meant to be heard, remembered, and feared. And they underscore the Deuteronomist's core message: fidelity to Jehovah is the key to life in the land. Let's get into it.
Let's get into it, Jono.
So listen, the first thing, the way that it kicks off, when you enter the land, Ross, that the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of every fruit of the soil which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you, put it in a basket, and go to the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name. You shall go now. This is interesting, and it takes a little bit of a shift here. You shall go to the priest in charge at that time, and you shall say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God that I have entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to assign to us. The priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. It's interesting the way it does that.
It is.
Does it read that way in the Torah tablet?
I'm looking at the ASV, and verse 4, and set it down before the altar of Jehovah thy God.
And when you're giving it to the priest in verse 3, I have entered the land that the Lord, I acknowledge this, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God, he's saying to the priest.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's curious. So well, the reason why it is interesting is because I noticed in the Jewish Study Bible, it has a note here, and it suggests that perhaps verse 3 and verse 4 are added later. I don't know I don't know that Baden or Richard Elliott Freeman necessarily agree with that, but it is interesting to read this way. So if I go from verse 2, you shall take some of the, and straight into verse 5, you shall take some of the first fruit of the soil which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and put it in a basket and go to the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name. You shall then recite as follows before the Lord your God, my father was a fugitive Aramean. But what it does is it bypasses that awkward exchange with a priest and say to him, this is I acknowledge
Yeah.
the Lord your God, O priest. It just reads
Right.
a little bit awkwardly, I think. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that we see, not only here, but in other portions or other parts of this Torah portion, is we're going to see some switching of person. And it confuses. We see that not only here, but elsewhere in the Pentateuch. But it could be. I mean, it could very well be. But this is an interesting passage, especially once we get to this, how I don't know how yours translates. What did it say, a fugitive Aramean?
Yes. So what do you have in the Torah tablet?
Well, in the ASV it says a Syrian with a footnote that says Hebrew Aramean, ready to perish. A Syrian, an Aramean ready to perish or wandering, words either way it could go, was my father, and he went down into Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, and he became there a nation great, mighty, and populous. So I've done a little bit on this Aramean, and I wanted to bring up a couple of things. So let's say you go to the priest at this time, and you're going to bring your offering. Who is he referring to, or who would you be referring to as your father, and why would they say an Aramean? Have you given that any thought? I mean, who is this referring to?
It's curious. Is he referring to, is he referring to, those who went down to Egypt, small in number?
Yeah.
I mean, if we look at the Moses scroll, we're talking about Israel, and if we go to Genesis, then it would have us believe that Israel was first named Jacob, so I suppose we're talking about Jacob.
Well, and that's what I think as well. And a lot of the resources that I checked this week point us toward Jacob. For instance, Genesis chapter 25:20. But I'm going to say even more than just Jacob, because one of the things that I've done in my studies, particularly in the patriarchal narratives, we know in the Hebrew Bible that we have 4 places where Abram is said to have come from Ur of the Chaldees. But there's a problem with that, Jono, because as you know, the term Kasdim or Chaldean is something that would have to be anachronistic to the patriarchal times. In other words, there is no Kasdim. There is no Ur of the Chaldees, because that reflects a later period, probably more roughly around 1000 BC. But we're talking about, something quite a bit earlier than that, depends on when you date the Exodus. But just a couple of terms, a couple of things that I had in my notes is that the numerous Genesis passages which support an Aramean homeland for the patriarchs. For instance, in Genesis 24, when Abraham sends his servant to go get a woman for his son, he sends him to the place of his birth. And the place of his birth in Genesis 24, according to this narrative, is Aram Naharaim. Now, that means obviously Aram between the 2 rivers, which run all the way from the south, where we would place Ur of the Chaldees, but into the northern region, where these boys always go and get their girls from, right? We see this all, because that's the homeland. That's where they go. So anyway, I just have a note that says, when Jacob flees Padan Aram, or to Padan Aram to live with Lavan, Genesis 28, verse 5, Genesis 31:18. Of course, the Abraham story I just mentioned. These connections consistently refer to the land of the fathers, Genesis 24:7, Genesis 31:3 in the north, and not Ur of the Chaldees. We think that Ur of the Chaldees is something which is much later. It's anachronistic. Now, one of the studies that I did, there is a place in the north. I'll post a link to that paper that I wrote, which is similar in sound in the native tongue. It does have at least the part Ur in it, but it's in the north. It's in Aram Naharaim. So I think when it says, to your point, whenever it mentions my father was a wandering Aramean, that's true, and you could even make it plural and say my fathers were a wandering Aramean, whether you're talking about Abraham or you're talking about Jacob. Now, we know that Isaac didn't leave, but his wife was from there too. So interesting idea anyway.
Yeah, it really does stick out. And it goes on to represent, I guess, the Exodus style narrative regarding coming out of Egypt. It says that the Egyptians dwelt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried out to Jehovah, our God of our fathers, and Jehovah heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery and our oppression. Jehovah freed us from Egypt by and then you get these phrases that don't occur in the Moses scroll, but are pretty common throughout our Torah, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, by awesome power and signs and wonders, or signs and portents I've got here. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Again, that's a phrase that occurs many times throughout the Tanakh, but does not occur in the Moses scroll. It's a little bit of a clue. Wherefore now, bring the first fruits of the soil which you, O Jehovah, has given me. And so you leave it before Jehovah your God. Yep, go ahead.
You know what's interesting about that? What's missing? What's missing out of this is, you're bringing your first fruits and you're telling the story of the Exodus, and there's no mention of Horeb. There's no mention of that major event. And one of the things that I read in the New Oxford Annotated Bible is this is shocking. I mean, when we come across this, the footnote said something to the effect, it is striking that nowhere does this mention an event at Horeb. And so I thought, well, is it that striking? And then it said, compare Joshua 24. So if I go to Joshua 24, which is also a recital of what happened, let's just look at that for a moment. Joshua 24, verse 4. And I gave unto Isaac Jacob and Esau, and I gave unto Esau Mount Seir to possess it, and Jacob his children went down into Egypt, and I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt according to that which I did in the midst thereof, and afterward I brought you out. I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came into the sea. The Egyptians pursued after your fathers with chariots, with horsemen, unto the Red Sea. When they cried to Jehovah, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians and brought the sea upon them and covered them. And your eyes saw what I did in Egypt, and you dwelt in the wilderness many days. And I brought you into the land of the Amorites.
The Amorites, yeah.
See, well, there's some things in here that are quite interesting. And another one, here's another historical account that doesn't mention, I mean, to me, that's a pretty big oversight, isn't it? I mean, this is like the most significant thing, and it reminded me of when we were in all of the priestly material, and that material which is attributed to the priestly pen. And one of the things that's important in that literature is, or let me say it this way, one of the things that's not so important to the priest is Horeb. What is important is the tabernacle. I mean, everything points to the tabernacle and so forth. So it's just a thought, Jono. All I wanted to do was bring up that we have two historical accounts that dance all around the revelation at Horeb, the watershed event, the most significant event in all of the Pentateuch. Why
fails to be mentioned. Yeah.
I find that striking.
I also do, now that you've pointed it out like that. And speaking of the priest, Ross, coming to verse 11 here, and you shall enjoy together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst all the bounty that the Lord your God has bestowed upon you and your household. And then it goes on to talk about a tithe. And it's interesting, there's inconsistency as to the application of the tithe, how it's deducted and whom it goes to. But here, what I do find curious, and it refers to the Levite here, but the tithe seems to be sort of like a 10% that you set aside for charity, Ross. It is for not just the Levite and the stranger, but it's for like when we get to verse 12, the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that they may eat their fill in your settlements. And it got me thinking, it did, as we have said in previous Torah portions, and we will be highlighting again and repeating today in this Torah portion, the Levite, at least in the Moses scroll, is not a tribe. The Levite is those who accompany or those who have joined themselves to Israel. And in the Moses scroll, the Levites are always referred to as ha-Leviim, the Levites, whereas the tribes are referred to by name, Reuben, Gad, Asher. It's never the Reubenites or the Gadites or you know what I mean? Yep. And so that is most curious. And here, it seems like, Ross, those who are in this case, so that the Levites do not inherit land because they're not a tribe, are perhaps in need or certainly recipients of charity as the stranger, as the fatherless, as the widow, and they are in this list of people that benefit from the tithe that you set aside.
Well, I want to get Ezra to give us a little bit more on the tithe, but before we do, I just wanted to bring in, because we've talked about this a couple of weeks in a row now, this idea that some academics say that Levi was not in the original listed as a tribe, and that's indicated by the name and several other clues. So let's see. Here's a sentence. This is from Edan Dershowitz's Valediction of Moses. And he says, the Levites are designated as, to your point just now, ha-Leviim, the Levites, a plural with the definite article. The Levites are present, but they're not a tribe. Although these list of tribes, by the way, this is getting into a little bit into the Ebal and Gerizim stuff, but I'll leave that out. Although these list of tribes differs from the Deuteronomic counterpart, it's not entirely unfamiliar. For instance, in Numbers 13, 1 through 5, we find a list of those who are to go out as tribes. Each one has a representative of the tribe. And it goes through and it names all of them. Despite the instructions being from each of their ancestral tribes, you shall send a man, and despite that there's a total of 12 being dispatched, no spy is sent from the tribe of Levi. And he goes in and he gives other examples where Levi is just off the list. So I know we'll get more into that in a few minutes, but it just, when you mentioned it, I said, let me go ahead and put this out there, that there are times where tribes and tribal representatives, people as representatives from each of the tribes, are listed, and Levi is not one of them.
That's right. So with that in mind, before we just jump off this topic, here's an interesting experiment that I ran just this past week while researching for this Torah portion. And that is, and I'll let the viewers do this. We won't go into too much detail now, but do a search in the Torah, and certainly focus in on Deuteronomy, of the term Levi. See where it pops up, Levi, and as in capital L, Levi, and have a look at the context therein. Then do a search of the priests, the Levites, and you'll probably have something more to say about that soon, Ross. And have a look at the context where that pops up, and then have a look at the Levites, ha-Leviim, and look at the context, and you'll see that the context is very, very different and motivated, it would appear, by different contributors. I found that rather
there's
telling.
no doubt. There's no doubt that what we find in the rest of the Pentateuch is the priests are always the sons of Aaron. They're just always the sons of Aaron. And Deuteronomy knows nothing of that. Deuteronomy only mentions Aaron twice. Once, God's so mad at him, Moses says, he wants to kill him. The other time is when it gives a place that he dies and is buried, but it doesn't match the rest of the Pentateuch. It's in Mosaic and not Mount Hor. And every time in Deuteronomy, instead of the priest, you find, or instead of the sons of Aaron, you find the Levitical priest, Ha-Kohanim, Ha-Leviim. All right, can we, before we go more into that, can I get Ezra to help us just quickly kind of go over the different tithes? You know, a lot of people out there have been told, bring your tithes and drop them in the offering plate. And we have quite a bit on tithes. So maybe, Ezra, if you could summarize that for us, we'd really appreciate it.
Now we're getting into the weeds, and they're growing in the fields of ancient Israelite economics. The term tithe really just means a tenth, but the Pentateuch doesn't keep things that clean and simple. We actually find multiple tithing laws with different purposes, settings, and even time frames. Here's the scholarly lowdown. The first is what's often called the Levitical tithe. This is a straightforward tenth of produce given to the Levites, who had no land inheritance and served the sanctuary. That's from the priestly source. Think Numbers especially. The Levites, in turn, give a tenth of that to the priests. Then we hit Deuteronomy, which shifts the tone. It commands a tithe too, but instead of giving it away, Israelites are to bring it to the central sanctuary and consume it there in a communal celebration before Jehovah. That's less about sustenance for clergy and more about ritual participation and joy in the presence of the deity. But wait, every third year, Deuteronomy says, don't bring the tithe to the sanctuary. Instead, store it in your town for the Levites, foreigners, orphans, and widows. This becomes a charity tithe of sorts. Same tenth, but redirected. Now, if we ask whether these all stack up, the answer depends on how you harmonize the sources. If taken sequentially and literally, some scholars suggest Israelites could be tithing up to 20 or even 23.3% in certain years, though that's debated. More likely, we're looking at overlapping traditions from different priestly and Deuteronomic circles, each with their own social and theological priorities. So, yes, more than 10%, and no, there's no single unified system. It's like biblical budgeting by committee.
So listen, Ross, let me just point out one thing here.
All right.
In the time of, or the narrative rather, of Joseph, I think the maximum tithe that people were, or tax that was being imposed upon the Egyptians during time of famine was 20%. And today, if we look at 20%, we're like, yeah, okay, well, if our taxes could only be capped at 20%, that'd be great.
Right.
Even 23.3% as
that's better than most credit cards if someone's credit isn't that good, you know?
I'm telling you, man, if it was capped at that, I think we'd all be doing a lot better. And certainly less would be grand.
Right.
But an interesting thing about this that I have to speculate on, and I'm not the expert, but I'm just saying, it seems like these verses here are treating Levi, although the Levites may be officiating as priests in the temple during the time of the Josianic reform. That's fine. But it seems to still want to acknowledge that the Levites are those who accompany Israel. They don't have land, and they, together with the widow and the orphan and the foreigners, you know, every third year, just take the 10, just make sure you don't forget those guys. Take care of them. Take care of them, the Levites. And it seems like maybe later they evolved into or managed to launder themselves into Israel's history as a tribe, and that some verses have been tinkered with or inserted into the Torah and perhaps into Deuteronomy that suggests this. And so just going back to what I said a little bit earlier in regards to doing a search of those three phrases that I mentioned, let me just look at one example, and that is Levi, capital L, right, as a tribe. What we have, because it's a short list, so I'm just going to highlight this. It first pops up in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 8 and 9. That's it. 10 verses 8 and 9, outside of the Josianic reform. which is chapters 12 to 26, right? We're about to finish that, which is great. But it says, here's the context for us. It says, at that time, the Lord separated the tribe of Levi to bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord, to minister him, and to bless in his name unto this day, which is just a massive acronym, is it not, right? And then it says in verse 9, wherefore Levi hath no part nor inheritance with his brethren. The Lord is his inheritance, according to the Lord thy God promised him. So it's clearly an insertion to justify.
Wait,
go ahead.
Let me prove it.
Go ahead.
Jono, I'm glad you brought that up. This section is absolutely from a different hand than the text before and after. Get ready. If I start in Deuteronomy 10, which is where we are, and, it begins in verse 1. I'm not going to go all the way back, but God tells Moses, and Moses is speaking first person. Jehovah told me to make 2 tablets and to make an ark, which is a whole nother thing. This isn't talking about the 2 spirit-filled artisans. This is Moses making an ark. Look at verse 5. And I turned and came down from the mount and put the tables in the ark which I had made, and there they are, as Jehovah commanded me. Skip down to verse 10. And I stayed in the mount, as at the first time, 40 days and 40 nights, and Jehovah hearkened unto me that time also. This verses 6 through verse 9 is an entire section which is plugged in later, and part of this section gives us a little bit of the itinerary. Verse 6, this is where the children of Israel went. They journeyed from Be'erot to Beni Yakin to Moserah. There Aaron died. This doesn't match what Numbers chapter 33 says.
Mentions of Aaron,
And so this, first of all, as you work your way through it, it says that this is how the Levites were set apart, but we know in other accounts that they were singled out because they killed all their brothers with the sword, remember? But this one says this is where it happened. If you go down, this entire section, all the way through verse 9, clearly is an interpolation. It's got the wrong geography. It's got the wrong sequence of events. Everything about it says, hey, look at me. I wasn't here. If you read and now I am. So now your point about this section being inserted, which just happens to talk about the tribe of Levi, now people have to go, well, what do we do with all these other clues? Interesting.
It is. And we're not entirely out of place because we'll be in chapter 11 in just a moment of Deuteronomy. But just to give a couple of other examples, all of the other, well, not all of them, but the other mentions of Levi as a tribe are in the Josianic Reform, starting with Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 1. And it kicks off like this, Ross. The priests, the Levites, and all the tribes of Levi, the priests, the Levites, and all the tribe of Levi have no part or inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offerings made by fire and his inheritance. 21. And the priests, the sons of Levi, 27. And this is where we're going to talk about this more in detail, because the placement of Levi in chapter 27, verse 12, that falls into our Torah portion, highly significant. We're going to go into detail when we get there. And then it's chapter 31, unto the priests, the sons of Levi, chapter 33. And Levi said, let thy Urim and thy Thummim be with the Holy One, so on and so forth. And that's it. That's all.
Interesting.
It's very, very telling. Very telling. All right. Now, listen, we're at the end, just going back to 26 here, unless there's something you want to highlight before this, but verse 16 until the end is the wrapping up of the Josianic Reform. And the way that it does this, Ross, is by telling everyone, okay, this is the body of text, this, which I've just presented to you, this whole 100 laws that you've never heard before that aren't in any other
chapters.
book. 15 chapters. All of this stuff, this is it. And so this is the way that it reads. The Lord your God commands you this day to serve to observe these laws and rules, observe them faithfully with all of your heart and soul. So it's using some of the vocabulary from Moses too. It's just applying it to this body of law. You have affirmed this day that Lord your God, that you will walk in all of his ways and observe all of his laws and his commandments and his rules, and that you will obey him. And the Lord has affirmed this day that you are, as he promised, his treasured people, who shall observe all of these commandments, his commandments, and that he will set you in fame and renown and glory high above all the nations that he has made, and that you shall be, as he promised, a holy people to the Lord your God. And that is the way that the Josianic reform ends, or is it?
The Deuteronomic Law Code from chapter 12 through the end of 26. In fact, it could even involve the first few verses or the last few verses of 11. But that whole body of law, we now believe, is from the Josianic reform. And several other scholars have proposed that. Interesting.
Now, speaking of, it really is. And speaking of the last verses of chapter 11, let me just read from verse 31. For you are about to cross, this is where we were up to before we launched into the Josianic reform. For you are about to cross the Jordan to enter and possess the land that the Lord your God is assigning you. When you have occupied it and are settled in it, take care to observe all the laws and rules that I have set before you this day. Chapter 27, verse 1, Ross, you ready?
I'm ready.
Moses, now we're still in the third person here. Moses and the elders of Israel charged the people, saying, observe all the instruction that I enjoin upon you this day. As soon as you have crossed the Jordan into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall, and then that's where the connection is.
Yeah.
It overlaps right there from 11, the last verse of 11, to the first verse of 21. There's that little piece of repetition showing quite clearly that the editors of this Josianic reform, those who have, if you like, sewn this into the structure of the book, have done so intentionally, absolutely intentionally. And just to remind everybody, the intention is to remove the blessings. We're going to be talking about that very, very soon. The blessed be the man who, right? There are 10 of those, one corresponding to each commandment, each word. Remove those, because we can't have the people knowing that this is the way that they are blessed. What we do want them to know is that they are blessed by observing these 15 chapters of new laws. That is the Josianic reform. Your thoughts?
Well, that's certainly one possibility. What we do know is that there seems to be a major interruption. We have 15 chapters of interruption between Moses is being interrupted. He's talking about the Ebal and Gerizim. He interrupts himself, goes for 15 chapters. Then, oh yes, let me go back to what I was saying before. He jumps right back in. Now, one thing, just before I forget it, notice in 27, it begins, one of the things that's interesting in this particular passage is that Moses is joined by the elders in addressing the people. That's kind of odd.
That's right.
It's only here in Deuteronomy.
It is
Moses
only here. That's
and
right.
the elders, but clearly we're no longer in first person. So that's the other thing that strikes us is there has to be a way. I mean, in chapter 11, it seems we're in first person. In 27, there's got to be this bridging between the end of the law code and the resumption of Moses. And that's all it is. So you have to have someone, a third-person author, telling us this. Now, to your point, we're going to see quickly here that certain things they have to fall out. Now, whether it's intentional, as you described, or someone lost it or whatever, we will see.
I'm standing by that, doubling down.
We will see that it's missing. So anyway, now I'm ready whenever you are to jump in.
The first thing they do is they're told to set up large stones. Now, we don't have this in the Moses scroll. This is added into the text here. Set up some large stones, coat them with plaster, and inscribe upon them the words of this teaching. What teaching? All of that teaching that we just had, the whole 15 chapters plus the 10 words prior to it, is what the Josianic Reform wants us to believe. When you cross over to enter into the land your God that is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, again, there's that phrase, a little bit of a clue, as the Lord your God, your fathers, has promised you, upon crossing the Jordan, you shall set up these stones. And now let's stop there for a second.
Okay.
I kind of like that part. I kind of like it because I think I'm reasonably convinced that the Ebal and Gerizim ceremony that we're about to get into is kind of an outworking, a grand outworking of the Shema, right? Where it says, write them on the gates, on the doorposts. This is, you're entering into my property here, and these are the rules that I abide by. Well, they're about to enter into the land, and at the entrance of the land, the wadi that follows up between these two mountains, is the entrance up into the land. Stop here, declare the words, your observance of them, that you agree to abide by these conditions, and let's go. Well, why not at the same time have some stones on which you set up at the entrance and write the 10 words on them? Now, it's not in the Moses Scroll, but I kind of like it. I'm not opposed to this at all, and it seems to, again, be a sort of a grand outworking of the Shema. What are your thoughts on that?
I love what you just said, and I'm all for it. But as often is the case, you can't just have something that is seemingly makes sense without an insertion by a scribe. Can I show you another one?
Please,
look,
go
it's
ahead.
right here. It's right here. There's this beautiful idea that when you go into the land, Jono, you're going to set up these two stones, and maybe Jono's right. It's some kind of like a mezuzah almost. Put these on the doorpost. There you go.
Yeah.
You're gonna. You shall plaster them with plaster. That's the end of verse 4. Now skip down to 8. And you shall write upon the stones all the words of this law very plainly.
Sure.
There you go. Well, that makes sense. But we got to put something in the middle here. Verse 5. You're gonna do these stones. What kind of stones? Just some stones. You're gonna plaster it and put some words on it. Verse 5. And there shalt thou build an altar unto Jehovah thy God, an altar of stones. You shall lift up no iron tool upon them, saith the priestly writer. I added that. Thou shalt build the altar of Jehovah thy God of unhewn stones, and you shall offer burnt offerings thereon unto Jehovah thy God, and you shall sacrifice peace offerings, and you shall eat there, and you shall rejoice before Jehovah thy God. It's clearly, it doesn't, I mean, it's obvious if you read up through verse 4 and then verse 8, it's just talking about some stones that you're going to write upon.
Right.
But then there's this altar.
I love this. So further to your point, Ross, is actually verse 9 and verse 10. Now, as you pointed out, chapter 27 begins with, Moses, and the elders. And they're very important. Well, here we have Moses in verse 9. Moses and the Levitical priests spoke all to Israel, saying, silence, and then here it is, Shema Yisrael. So it's like they want to
that's interesting.
This. Yeah, it is interesting, right? Shema Yisrael. Today you have become the people of Jehovah your God. Heed the Lord your God, Jehovah your God, and observe his commandments, his laws, which I enjoin upon you this day. So it very much suggests that, again, like this is some sort of national mezuzah, like you put it. We're going to put these stones, we're going to put the words. And the question is, well, what did they write on it? Did they write all of those 15 chapters that the Josianic Reform just presented to us, or did they write the 10 words? And that really is a debate, and people...
Well, you know what most people think? Most people think that they had these big stones, and you have to write small, Jonah, because most people think that they wrote Bereshi bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz v'haaretz hayta tohu v'vohu v'choshek al panei. They're writing from Genesis 1 through Deuteronomy 34:12. That's what some people think, because that in their mind is the law. What is it that's written on this law, on these stones, becomes a matter of debate, and it's a curious It's a big question mark.
Mhm.
Even if you decided we're only going to write the 15 chapters from Deuteronomy 11 through 26, even that would take up a considerable amount of space, right?
Mm,
So I think what they put on there is the law.
The 10 words.
It's the 10 words. I think that's what
If
they
they
put
set up
on there.
these big giant Mizzou, and they may not be giant, just reasonable sized stones so that people walking past can see it,
Yeah.
and read it, the 10 words, perhaps as they're presented in the Moses scroll, with the interpuncts and so on and so forth.
Right.
I love to think that that is the case if they did this at all, but I really like the idea that they did. Now, it's not represented in the Moses scroll, but the
But we have it
ceremony.
here. We have it here.
Oh, we have it
And we
here.
have it in Joshua.
Mm-hmm. But the ceremony of Ebal and Gerizim most certainly is in the Moses scroll. Now, this is where things, for me, get really, really interesting, Ross.
All right, I'm ready.
Verse 11. Okay. Thereupon Moses charged the people, saying, verse 12, after you have crossed the Jordan, the following shall stand on Mount Gerizim, when the blessing for the people is spoken: Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, Benjamin. And for the curse, the following shall stand on Mount Ebal: Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. The Levites shall then proclaim in a loud voice to all the people, saying. So what you have, Ross, here is Levi. Here's one of the examples of Levi, capital L, referred to as a tribe, is placed on Mount Gerizim. From Mount Gerizim, they are to declare in a loud voice to all the people of Israel.
Yeah, going to have to be a loud voice.
Has to be a loud voice. Cursed be the one who makes a sculptured molten image and abhorrent to the Lord. A craftsman's handiwork sets it up in secret. All the people shall say amen. And this is the formula, and they go through this list that deviates a little bit from what is in the Moses scroll, but here you have cursed be the man who, and it goes on.
Yeah.
Then they have to announce the blessings. Well, who does that? And where do they do that from? Mm-hmm. And this becomes a problem. And it becomes even more problematic when you go to Joshua chapter 8, verse 33. We flick over there for a second.
Yeah.
Because it mentions this ritual.
Yep.
In a slightly different way, Ross. And what it has in 33 is all Israel, stranger and citizen alike, with their elders, officials, and magistrates, stood on either side of the ark, facing the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the Lord's covenant. Half of them faced Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim, and half of them faced Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded them of old, in order to bless the people of Israel. And after that, he read all the words of the teaching, the blessings, and the curses, just as it was written in the book of the teaching. So what we have here, it would appear, is that the Levites are in the center with the Ark of the Covenant, right. And then you have half of Israel on one side and half on the other. Now, what Joshua doesn't tell us is, well, which half then is on that side and which half is on that side. It doesn't go into detail. But the problem is that one has Levi on Gerizim, the other one has Levi in the middle. What's your thoughts so far?
That's excellent. That's excellent. By the way, we'll have a link in the description of your article that sort of brings a very good solution to these problems. But I wanted to say that when these Levites are in the middle, one of the things that is important is that they read the law, right, and the blessing and the curse. Well, I tell you where they didn't read it from. They couldn't read it from Deuteronomy 27 because it's not there.
It's not there.
They can't read the blessing, and we have an article, linked to an article in the description of this video called "The Missing Blessings." It begins, like you said, with there's going to be this ceremony. You're going to give the blessings and you're going to give the curses. And then it says, cursed be, cursed be, cursed be, cursed be. There's no blessings.
Interesting thing about that is that in Joshua chapter 8, verse 33, it says that the Levites are in the middle there with the Ark of the Covenant in order to bless the people, right? But we don't have it, to your point. It's not there. So the way that this is resolved, by the way, is, this is not a secret. The sages of old say, well, you see, okay, so the way that this is resolved is that Levi is divided. So you have some in the middle declaring the blessings and the curses in a loud voice, and you have some up on Mount Gerizim. And that's the way that they have to solve it, which is an interesting thing.
Didn't you find a reference in rabbinic literature? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. You got it. Go ahead. Yeah. What does it say?
Well, let me read. I'll just read this little bit from my article. So, where the Levites on Mount Gerizim, were they on Mount Gerizim or were they in the Valley between? Did they pronounce the curses, the blessings, or both? Rabbeinu Baya combines the two accounts, stating that, quote, 6 tribes whose ancestors were sons of Leah or Rachel stood on the mountain facing which the blessings was pronounced. So he doesn't identify the tribe by name, but continues by quoting from Sotah 32, and which concurs with Joshua 8:33, by placing the Levites in the valley. But if there are 6 tribes on either side and Levi in the middle, are there not then 13 tribes, Ross? This is the problem. Not so, says Rabbi Yoshia. So Rabbi Yoshia says, only the elders of the priesthood, and this is the division, only the elders of the priesthood and the Levites stood below, and the rest of the Levites stood on the mountain. Rabbi Yoshia says, any Levite who was fit to serve in the temple stood below, in the temple, Ross, between the mountains, and the rest of the tribe, who were too young or too old to serve in the temple, stood above on the mountain. So in this way, the Levites are divided, some atop the mountain and some in the valley below. Dividing the Levites into 2 groups may be expedient, but it does not answer the question as to why certain tribes were assigned to the mountains. So
now you're going into your article more of who's on what mountain. What I'm asking is, didn't you find a rabbinic reference that says about the missing blessings?
Sotah 7:5, if I remember correctly. So there, and Dershowitz mentions this, I think, in Valediction of Moses. But what that says is, in the English translation, it says, obviously, the Levites would have pronounced "Blessed be the man" and the list of corresponding "Blessed be the man" to the "Cursed be the man" from verses 15 to 26. They assume and they say, of course it would have been.
We just don't have them anymore.
We just don't have them anymore. We don't have them. Is the point that they make? Yeah, quite right.
Now, rather than go into the difficult thing to explain that we've struggled to explain for some of our viewers in the past, we'll tell them to check the link. But here's what always happens. We say there are no blessings in the blessing and curse ritual that's recorded in Deuteronomy 27. And here's what everyone says. Everyone says this. Yes, there are. Ross and Jono just don't understand because that's in chapter 28. That is not in chapter 28. Shake your head 3 to 9. That means no, it's not there. What we see is chapter 27 has, beginning in verse 15, cursed be, verse 16, cursed be, 17, cursed be, all the way down. What you find in chapter 28 deals with blessing, and it will come to pass if you hearken diligently. This is what's going to happen. They're going to, you're going to be blessed in this way. These are the consequences of the blessing, which mirrors what we find in chapter 28, verse 15, which is the consequences of the curse. So the way my document shows it, the link to which is in the description, you've got no blessing, you've got curses. You've got consequences of blessings, you've got consequences of curses. So you're missing a major chunk of the ceremony. What is it? Well, that's part of the problem.
That's the thing. And so just to clarify what you were just saying, chapter 28, verses 3 to 6 are the consequences of the blessing, and it does find a corresponding section in chapter 28, verses, I guess it's 16 to 19, and they're identical. If you look at both of those, they're almost identical, and this is represented pretty closely in the Moses Scroll as well. We just don't have as Dershowitz puts it, the blessed man, the corresponding blessed man list. Yeah. All right. So just save your comments, people. Digest that before you write back to us and tell us that the blessings are there. Now, why are some tribes on one side and some on the other? People don't know. I'm going to read, what's this? His Kuni. This is his explanation, right? He thinks that the positioning of a tribe on Mount Ebal is, if not a condemnation, then at least a designation of lower status, Ross, because that's the amount of cursing, right? Quote, all the tribes that stood on the mountain listening to the blessing were descendants of Jacob's principal wives, Leah and Rachel. Seeing that Leah had so many sons, they took the oldest and the youngest of these and placed them with the 4 tribes that were descended from the auxiliary wives. Leah's oldest son, who had been under suspicion of having committed an inappropriate act with one of Jacob's auxiliary wives, was placed there so that the curse on people sleeping with their neighbors or their father's wives would be impressed upon the descendants of his who heard it. So it wants to suggest that, those who were on the mountain of cursing,
they earned that place.
They're either, sons of concubines or whatever, or they did something significantly wrong. Problem is that then there is the youngest of Leah's. What did he do? So what is the problem there? So the Moses Scroll, the way that it puts it, it says, and it will be that when Elohim brings you into the land which you are going there to possess, you will give the blessing on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal. It goes on to say, and these will stand, Ross, on Mount Ebal, Reuben, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, Dan, and Naphtali. And these will stand on Mount Gerizim, Simeon, Judah, Issachar, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Benjamin. And the Levites will stand opposite Mount Gerizim, and they will respond, and they will say in an exalted voice, blessed be the man. And then you have that list. And then it goes on to say, and they will continue with their faces opposite Mount Ebal, and they will respond, and they will say in an exalted voice, cursed be the man. And then you have that list. And as we have been saying all the way along, pay attention to the competing list of tribes. You have a list of tribes, of 12 tribes of Israel that include Levi and Joseph, and then you have the one that we just read, that includes Manasseh and Ephraim. Now, to Hizkuni's point, the eldest and the youngest appear on Mount Ebal. Well, actually, in the Moses Scroll, Ross, there is a very intentional pattern that I noticed some years ago, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, and that is that the list that I just read in the Moses Scroll lists the tribes in order of eldest and youngest patterns throughout. So let me give you an idea of that. So on Mount Ebal, you have Reuben, the eldest, Zebulun, the youngest of Leah. You have Gad, eldest of Zilpah, and Asher, the youngest of Zilpah. You have Dan, the eldest of Bilhah, and Naphtali, the youngest of Bilhah. And then over on Gerizim, you have Simeon, Judah, Issachar, mentioned in order from eldest to youngest of the set. And then you have, and this is going to be controversial, but then you have Manasseh, Ephraim, and Benjamin. Well, if the pattern follows, and there is clearly an intentional pattern here, what this is suggesting, Ross, is that the fourth matriarch, and we would call her Rachel based on Genesis, it would suggest that Manasseh is the eldest, Ephraim is the middle child, Benjamin is the baby of them.
Now, all of this is broken down in your paper, and I think that when people read that, it's hard to. I don't see how someone can read it and say, "Oh, I don't see a pattern."
There's clearly a pattern. This eldest to youngest pattern is clearly there.
And so if that's the case, then it's not like years ago I remember, well, why is Dan in the biblical account, isn't Dan on the mountain of the curse? Is that right? Do you remember?
Let me go back.
Let me
up
look.
And double-check
It
where it
says
is.
curse. Let me make sure I'm reading that. Yep. So, well, that's why he's missing from the tribes list in Revelation, because he, you see.
He's a bad boy.
I'm just joking. Yeah, but that's one of the reasons when people see these different lists and different arrangements, it goes to the point of the author that you just quoted that said, well, maybe this person, Reuven, is on the mountain of the curse because he did what he did, and it's to impress on the minds of people that there's a consequence for what he did. Whereas this approach that you've taken in your article suggests that it's not arbitrary.
It's not arbitrary, and it's not a punishment to be on Mount
It's
Ebal.
not a punishment beyond that.
No commentator is really satisfied with that perspective. Others say, oh, maybe it's got to do with the geographic location of where they're going to inherit. And again, that's not really satisfying as well. What I would quote from Neufeld, and I do in my article, and he says that, because remember, we're talking about 4 wives, he says polygamy divided a man's family into sub-families, each presided over by a mother, a matriarch. The privileged position of one wife would appear to depend on the main, on her capacity for bearing children. So this actually does bear out in the division of the tribes here, because what you have is a ranking, if you like, of the matriarchs as to when they became mothers. The first one to become a mother is the ranking matriarch rather, and then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And then, of course, you have the order of birth of the sons, and they are awarded seniority in order of their birth. When you add these two ranking systems together, and if you just assign like one single unit per ranking, so in other words, you have 4 wives, so put 4 stripes on the arm. You were in the army, right? 4 stripes on the arm of the first matriarch, 3 on the next, 2, and then 1. You do the same for the sons in order of their birth. What you end up with when you add these together is a total of 30 on each mountain. A total of 30. So no one can say, oh, we're from the better mountain. We're from the mountain that ranks higher than your mountain. We outrank you. We are more senior. We have the blessing, or whatever it might be. In actual fact, it's perfectly impartial. So if people want to read about that, we'll put a link in the description.
Absolutely.
All right,
man. Where is Ebal and Gerizim? I know we've covered this in previous discussions, but I mean, you can't. Is it at Shechem, or is it right there? I mean, there's something about this place, and the text doesn't. If Shechem is really inland quite a bit of ways, then it certainly feels like something's amiss with the story about how you're going to do this and when you're going to do this, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's over a day's trekking, solid trekking, from Nebo, let's say, to what is regarded as the traditional Ebal Gerizim today, what I would say Northern or Samaritan revisionism, Ebal Gerizim. It is well over a day's serious trekking. It's not, as Moses says, just over there, in the direction of the setting of the sun. Well, Ebal Gerizim, as we understand it today, is not in the direction of the setting of the sun. It's much further north. It is just over there. And we've spoken about this in detail. Obviously, people say, well, what about that structure that we say is Joshua's altar? Well, is it? It might be an altar. It might not be an altar. It's certainly a structure, but does that have to be this as you pointed out, this insertion of an altar in chapter 27.
Yeah. By the way, that work is Adam Zertal, and those who are interested, there is, I'll put a link to that as well. His book, he's got a book out. Our good friend Daniel Wright even designed the cover for the book. But the idea that this structure is the altar, not just an altar, but that it is Joshua's altar, is what Adam Zertal and Zvi Konigsberg and some of these other guys have put together in their work. And so we want to be, for fairness, we'll give you those links. And of course, that brings up the whole subject from when there was a discovery there of a lead amulet and whether or not that was associated with the curse and so forth, remember? But
that's right.
There you go.
Just coming back to the blessings for a second there, Ross.
Yep.
You can obviously there's no threat to the Josianic reform if you have the consequences of the blessings, because they've already established that by which you are blessed is the observance of all that law, that we just gave you, and therefore if you observe all that law, well then you shall be blessed in the country, you should be blessed in the city, you should be blessed, the issue of your womb, the produce of your soil, the offspring of your cattle, the calving of your herd, the lambing of your flock, the basket and kneading bowl. And all of these blessings will come upon you, and that's great if you do all of that. And then you have, in the same way, the curses now, or the consequences of the curses in that same formula. But then it departs from the Moses scroll radically, and it hammers down, Ross, on these curses, and it is just it's just miserable. And we've highlighted this before. All this massive body of cursing that the Josianic reform adds to the list of curses that are actually, or the consequences of the curses that appear in the Moses scroll. But just to mention it again, you cannot have this massive body of cursing that will come upon you and also be put to death. I mean, in so many other places, it's like, well, if you did this thing, we're just going to stone you or be dead. Well, you can't have all the curses and be dead. It's one or the other. But what do you make of this just emphatic cursing that continues on?
I'm going to bring in Ezra in a moment, because one thing that I've heard a lot of people say, and I've even taught this in the past, years ago, when I would come to Deuteronomy 27:28, I would immediately associate it with Leviticus 26. And, there's this idea that Leviticus, towards the end of Leviticus, there's the blessings and the curses. We get another version of the blessings and the curses here in Deuteronomy. But it's interesting that in Leviticus, the word curse is not used, nor is the word blessing. So anyway, and by the way, both of those have a list of good things that will come upon you and bad things, whether they're called curses and blessings or not. And in both cases, the curses far outnumber the blessings or the good things. So let's ask Ezra to weigh in on this and see if he's got any insight.
Great catch by Ross, and a classic observation in academic circles. When you compare Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, you absolutely see the imbalance. Leviticus gives us a brief set of blessings, followed by a drawn-out section of curses. Deuteronomy follows the same structure, but the curses are even more intense and dramatically longer. Why? From a scholarly standpoint, the answer lies in the genre and purpose of these texts. Both sections mirror ancient Near Eastern vassal treaties, especially Hittite and Assyrian ones. These treaties always featured blessings for loyalty and curses for rebellion, but the curses far outweighed the blessings. Why? Because their primary function wasn't to inspire with reward, but to warn with terror. The more vivid and terrifying the curses, the more power they held to enforce covenant loyalty. Now, Leviticus comes from the priestly source, more temple-centered, liturgical, and structured. Its curses are severe but contained. Deuteronomy, shaped by the Deuteronomistic school, comes later and has a different rhetorical edge. It's preaching, pleading even, with a post-monarchic or exilic audience, explaining why disaster came upon Israel. That's why Deuteronomy's curses are more detailed, graphic, and emotionally intense. So to Jono's question, why more curses? Because the point isn't to balance carrots and sticks. It's to drive home the cost of disloyalty in unforgettable terms. Blessings attract, curses cling.
And I think that's probably fair because now that all of this massive body of law has been presented, you really want to drive it home to the people that, oh my goodness, if you don't do everything that we just told you have to do, it's going to be dire consequences. And actually, Ross, that brings me back to, now you remind me, when the scroll of Moses was found and it was taken to Josiah, and it's like, look what we just found. This is were they not? Doesn't it mention that they were absolutely overcome by the curses which were apparently written in it? Yeah, right. And because it says here, let me just read the final curse, the way that it puts it, and this is verse 68 of chapter 28. The Lord will send you back to Egypt in galleys by a route which I told you you should not see again, and there you shall offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but none will buy. So they are so destitute that they are willing, for some security to sell themselves as slaves, hoping that they might be fed and hoping that they might be clothed, hoping that they might be housed somehow, and no one will want them. This is how bad it's going to be.
By the way, one thing that that you might see if you're following along in the Torah tablet, or if you've studied or have other reference works which give the different categories or the different sources according to the documentary hypothesis, many have suggested that we have DTR1, which is like the first phase after DTR, which would be the law code. And then you have a reworking, which is post-exilic. So that's called DTR2. And what you just read, some of these threats of being carried away captive, some suggest that it was sort of written afterwards where you go, look, we were told that you would be carried away captive, and look, here you are, you're carried away captive. So that's the way some of that, in fact, here's an example in chapter 28, verse 36. Jehovah will bring thee and thy king, whom thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation that thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers, and there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone, and thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, byword among all the peoples, whither Jehovah shall lead thee. And that is listed as DTR2. Now, again, people can debate this, but this is sort of the way that it's been presented by some of the scholars who've looked at this, and that's one of the things they came up with.
So verse 69 switches into the third person. These are the terms of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to conclude with the Israelites in the land of Moab, in addition to the covenant which he had made with them in Horeb. Okay, so there's a little mention of Horeb there. And then we have chapter 29, and there's just a few verses there. I'm going to read them. Again, third person. Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, and now we switch into first person. Now, I'm trying to remember, some of this is derived from the Moses scroll, if I remember correctly. But not a great deal. It says, you have seen that the Lord your God did for your very eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his courtiers and to his whole country, the wondrous feats that you saw with your own eyes, those prodigious signs and marvels. Yet to this day the Lord has not given you a mind to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear, Ross. I led you through the wilderness 40 years. Clothes on your back did not wear out, nor did the sandals on your feet. You had no bread to eat and no wine, other intoxicated to drink, that you might know that I am the Lord your God. When you reached this place, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan came out to engage us in battle, but we defeated them. We took their land. We gave it to the Reubenites and to the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh as their heritage. Therefore, observe faithfully all the terms of this covenant, that you may succeed in all you undertake. And that is the way that our Torah portion ends. Do you have any comments on these verses, Ross?
I
Go
do.
ahead.
This contains what I have called, just for fun, and I think that it preserves a certain style that is at least a result of a writer, and I call it the deity of Moses, because what we have here exhibited is it's called an intrusion of divine speech. So here you've got Moses, and he's speaking, and as you pointed out, it starts off third person, but then it shifts to Moses speaking, and it goes into all the details. And I have led you 40 years. So I'm going to pick back up what you just read, but I'm going to start in verse 5. And I have led you 40 years in the wilderness, Moses is speaking. Your clothes are not waxed old upon you, and your shoe is not waxed old upon thy foot. Ye have not eaten bread, neither have you drunk wine or strong drink, that ye may know that I am Jehovah your God. Same speaker, Moses is still speaking, and you can explain it different ways, but we see this over and over in the prophets, and there are quite a few examples in the Pentateuch as well, but particularly in the prophets. And when we see it in the prophets or in the mouth of the prophets, it's at least, according to what we read in the Pentateuch and elsewhere, this is the way it happens. A man, a person, is speaking, and the Spirit of God begins to speak through them, and that's what we see here. It's just a switching of persons, and so therefore, there you have it. You could either come away with this and say that Moses claimed to be Jehovah, or he's speaking on behalf of God, and there's no switch there. You just have to follow it closely.
Compare with the Moses scroll.
That's right.
That brings us to Nitzavim. That is going to be next week. That kicks off from chapter 29, verse 9, and goes, good heavens, Ross, does it go to the end of chapter 30? All right.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to be dealing with next week. Hope you have a great week, and we'll be back this time.
Hey,
next
by the way,
week to launch
stick around, because after Ezra
class
takes us out of the show, we're going to have an after class, and I don't want anybody to miss an opportunity to ask questions, give comments. So stick around. We'll have a Zoom call for the members of the YACOD. Others will be able to watch on YouTube. So
there it
what
is.
else, Jono?
Like, subscribe, and comment below. We love to read the comments and appreciate the comments last week. That is all for this week. Ezra, take us on out.
That's going to wrap it up for this week's Torah Pearls on Ki Tavo. Heavy stuff, no doubt, but that's the nature of covenant. It blesses and it binds. Make sure you stick around for After Class with Ross. He's diving deeper into the structure and historical echoes of those covenantal formulas. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, Shabbat Shalom from all of us here. Keep studying, keep questioning, and as always, read responsibly.